Padraig makes a series of inappropriate errors in his continued quest to regain Colm's friendship. After recently watching the Banshees of Inisherin, I wanted to share my thoughts on the themes of the film and hopefully provide some valuable insight into why it's been so widely acclaimed. Even though it's not particularly exciting in its pace and subject matter, unable to compete with the industrious side of cinema. Seemingly, what it lacks in surface level attractiveness, it gains enormously in subtext and character depth. The film's essentially a study of loneliness, and this becomes progressively more apparent in how each character responds to one another's wants and needs throughout the film. While some characters strive to beat their loneliness, others tragically fail to adapt in any way at all. The story centres around a man named Padraig. Padraig lives with his sister Siobhan in a small cottage on the island of Inisherin. They lost both their parents 8 years prior to this. Padraig is a milk farmer, while Siobhan looks after everything else in the house. Almost immediately in the film, we're sucked into the drama. We learn that Padraig's close friend Colm no longer wants to be his friend, and he does so in such a cold and blunt manner. This leads Padraig to feel lost and confused, subsequently handling it poorly, as would most of us. Padraig confides in his sister, who jokingly tells him maybe he just doesn't like you no more. And although this appears obvious at first, it does seem that Colm is in fact fond of Padraig and clearly wants the best for him, because at the end of the day, Padraig is a nice man. Colm's just going through a tough time, and during these times, he identifies Padraig as a trigger to his despair, insulting him and labelling him as incredibly dull. Now most, if not all of us, have at some point experienced some form of rejection. It stings and leaves an intense feeling of loneliness. Naturally, we endeavour to find out why it happens and solve it, but we don't always use the correct approach, and so the wrong approach only serves to make matters worse. Although Padraig is advised by his peers to simply leave Colm alone, he persists in understanding Colm's sudden change of opinion. Colm's happy to explain his reasons, and fair enough, he clearly explains his desire to work on his music in order to build his legacy after he has gone. He can sense his inevitable death fast approaching. However, this is not enough of a reason for Padraig, especially since his pride is wounded for being seen as dull. Padraig's ignorance leads Colm to grow increasingly more frustrated by Padraig, until he warns him that each time he tries to speak to him, he will remove one of his fingers with garden shears. Now, you'd think that this was enough to stop Padraig from bothering Colm, but no. Padraig suspects this could be a bluff, because why would a man who plays the fiddle and writes music to fulfill his legacy cut off the most important body part needed to do so? Something doesn't add up, but if you think about it, it's just another problem that Padraig needs to leave alone. Nonetheless, his maladaptive attitude prevails. To add more fuel to the fire that is Padraig's recklessness, he is also concerned with how people on the island will view him as people begin to find out about this rejection. He worries he'll look stupid as a result of it. He finds solace in his friendship with the young lad Dominic, who many view as the village idiot. Although Dominic is quite bright considering his demeanour and appearance, Padraig doesn't quite see his potential and is always brooding whenever the two of them hang out. Still though, Dominic is a worthy friend substitute while Padraig deciphers the situation with Colm. Dominic is a very interesting character. For sure he is lonely, he's disliked on the island, he gets barred from the pub, his father beats him, and his goofiness repels women, to who he seemingly puts the majority of his effort. At this stage of his life, he could really use the wisdom of Padraig, his only real companion in life. Yet, unfortunately, Padraig is too wrapped up in his pride to share himself with Dominic. Siobhan is also lonely. She avoids social situations and likes to read sad books that enable her to escape from the madness of her reality. To Siobhan, it's important that Padraig is looked after, as his growth was probably stunted by the death of their parents. She is a strong motherly figure to Padraig, but he lacks his father figure, another reason why he needs Colm in his life. Colm and Siobhan appear to have a deep understanding of one another, but nevertheless, Siobhan is still angry at Colm for hurting her brother's feelings, as any loving sibling would be. Siobhan's confrontation with Colm ends with a stark realisation about her own relationship with Padraig, as if discarding someone so easily is both horrifying and liberating to her. Padraig makes a series of inappropriate errors in his continued conquest to regain Colm's friendship, which pushes Colm to remove a finger and throw it at Padraig's front door, personifying the saying, "Cut off your nose to spite your face," loosely. At this point we can see Colm is very mentally unwell. Self-mutilation is extreme to say the least, especially when it's done in order to stop somebody from bothering you. We suspect the mental illness, but we do find out Colm is in despair when he visits a confession booth in what's a really funny encounter. This is because he craves solitude, and even though solitude is distinct from loneliness, they are still closely related by definition. Pádraig is growing in loneliness because he craves connections that he cannot gain. As a result, Colm can't avoid connection, and Pádraig lives the solitary life which Colm desires. It's a harsh reality in life. Pádraig ignores his sister's attempts to discuss the topic of loneliness. This is another indicator that he is just not getting it. Everybody is shocked by Colm's actions and pleased with Pádraig to stop, which seems to work for a short period. Dominic teases Pádraig into believing he needs to be sterner, and after some minor attempts to sneak reconciliation, it's his most devious and malicious act that is the straw that breaks the camel's back. Correspondingly, Colm stays true to his word, removing all the fingers from his entire left hand, and then throwing them at Pádraig's front door. As barbaric as it is, Colm says it has actually done him a favour. After all, he's still able to teach the fiddle to the younger players. Siobhan's had enough and leaves Pádraig on the island, sinking Pádraig further into solitude and despair. And even though he is not open about it, you can clearly observe it in his behaviour. Pádraig's now at breaking point, but things intensify as his pet donkey, Jenny, unfortunately passes away after choking on one of Colm's fingers. This lands him at rock bottom, and as a result, he wages war against Colm. He tells Colm he will burn down his house while Colm is still inside, leaving the dog outside, of course. On the final day, Sunday, after church, Pádraig stays true to his word and burns down Colm's house with Colm still inside. Later that day, the two meet on the seashore. Colm obviously evacuated his house once Pádraig had fled. Colm tries to put the feud behind them. Pádraig is indifferent. He reiterates his declaration of war to be taken to their graves and walks away. And after Pádraig is thanked for looking after Colm's dog, he replies, "Any time," suggesting that despite their feud, there's still an undercurrent of love. The movie ends. This story taught me a lot. It helped me remember that we all have different spiritual levels in our life's journey. Some of us are lost and confused, and some of us are certain of it all. One thing's for sure though, we all experience loneliness. In the case of our characters of Inisherin, loneliness acts as a kind of social contagion, spreading throughout the community, perhaps a result of the civil war that devastated regular folk during that period in Ireland. It helped me see that our feelings of our own mortality are dealt with in such vastly different ways, so much so that when our worlds collide, it's incredibly difficult to relate to one another. Had Pádraig simply accepted Colm's request, then they could have maybe been stronger friends in the future. Of course, Colm handled things in a caustic manner and should have shown more compassion towards Pádraig, but regardless, Pádraig should have supported Colm, helping him through his despair, and perhaps asking to learn the fiddle or seeking his wisdom. If he'd shown more interest in Colm as a human, instead of trying to be funny or outrageous when he's drunk, I firmly believe they could have remained close friends. But instead of remaining friends, and growing a stronger bond, their connection developed into a battle. Siobhan and Dominic were more spiritually aligned with their surroundings than Pádraig and Colm were, yet were disregarded by others as a result of this gift. Siobhan did eventually take control of her loneliness, making her story arc a positive one. However, Dominic was less fortunate. His loneliness was unrelenting. Dominic had nothing and nobody at all, not even a rival. His father mistreated him, his fair-weathered friend turned crazy, and his love interest rejected him. As a result, he walked into the lake and drowned. A tragic end for a character who represents the youth of today stuck between supposedly responsible adults who struggle to solve their petty differences. Even though it was a sad ending overall, there were some comforting elements. The fact that Siobhan escaped the island and began her life on the mainland was a positive off-screen future. I even take solace in the last conversation between Pádraig and Colm. Despite the war declaration from Pádraig, it did seem like Colm had taken up the responsibility to help guide Pádraig after seeing this new side of him, albeit destructive side. But who knows, maybe I'm just an optimist. But my mindset was the opposite before watching this film. Even though I'm as lonely as everybody else on this earth, I'm still an optimist. And now I have a new realization that those around me are going through stuff I might never fully understand. But it isn't my job to try and understand, or to try and solve it either. Instead, I should focus entirely on simply supporting loved ones, rather than obsessing over helping them. Keeping them the way only I know how to deal with will only make matters worse for them. So as a reminder, shush Pádraig.
But shush like Pádraig, just You know, shush like.
Yeah, I'd shush like.
Shush now, Porrick. Shush. I'd shush. Yeah, I'd shush if I were you. Shush.